I'm running long, but I wanted to show a picture of a hermit. Hermits are the 19th century version of people who live under overpasses. Okay? But it's a nice example of that bucolic, right? That love of the bucolic. Right? He actually does live in a cave. Right? In the Middle Ages, people respected hermits because they were close to God, and a lot of Platonic, sort of Neoplatonic thought that the less worldly you were, the more spiritual you were. 19th century, I don't think really cares about the religious sentiments of the hermits. What's important about the hermits is they've left behind civilization. They've gone off on their own to live in some sort of Rousseauian ideal. Right? And they're cleaner than any hermits I've known. There's something else going on in the 19th century, and this is very dramatic. You can't miss this. It is the appearance of nationalism, which is sort of funny to us. I think we tend to think nationalism has like always been there, but not at all the case. The idea that all French speakers perhaps share some identity with each other, and they should be united in a French nation, not have foreign leaders, and that's really actually a very recent idea. This picture is sort of interesting. Not a nice romantic painting with all sorts of good feeling. It also is telling a story. 1830, the Belgians had been forced in 1815 to defeat Napoleon. The guys that won the war decided, let's combine the Netherlands and Belgium. They're small. They're sort of in the same place. They've actually been combined in the past. Europe had been full of these sorts of dynastic combinations. And in this case, suddenly by the early 19th century, you can't take a bunch of Dutch speakers and a bunch of French speakers and just sort of staple them together. And this is a trend that's happening across Europe. And I won't give you my full nationalism talk, but if you look at the map of Europe in 1818 and 1918, it is entirely changed. And what happens is that the borders really move, the political borders move to fit the ethnic borders. And so there are places where in 1818 there are no countries. There was no Italy. Italy was a geographical expression, as was Germany. When you said Germany in 1818, it was like saying Scandinavia today. It's not a country. It's a geographical expression. Germany and Italy unite. Other nations vanish. Austria-Hungary, the Austrian Empire. Got several different names, different times. But a giant multi-ethnic empire in the center of Europe, it's there in 1818. It's just gone at the end of World War I. So all the borders move around with this idea that peoples should govern themselves. The Irish are revolting against the British. The Poles are revolting as well against the Russians and the Germans and the Austrians at different times at the same times. The Germans are trying to unite all little Germanies. It's sweeping across Europe. And it's very hard actually to say where this comes from. The historians will point to things like new ideas about the origins of political power. People like John Locke and Hobbes who say, political authority comes from a consensus of the people. That may have an effect. It may be also national armies. Wars have been fought, 18th century wars are fought by small private armies led by kings. Suddenly 19th century wars are fought by giant mass armies made up of citizens. It's really hard to see where it comes from, but it is definitely coming from below. And what's really interesting is it has a definite connection with Romanticism, because nationalism at its heart sees a mystical bond. It's hard to say what makes a nation, but clearly a big part of it is a bunch of people saying, yes, we're a nation. And so places that didn't, there is no Poland in 1848, but there were people who spoke Polish and they're Catholic. They love karaoke, shared history, right? And they demand it, and they can assert that they're a nation. But behind it all is a mystical bond. Why there's a difference, I guess, between Americans and Canadians. Right? Some, I don't know, said mystical bond exists, but people certainly believe it exists. That there's something that unites them, and I think that's the connection here with Romanticism. And the last thing I want to talk about, with folk culture, really combines a bunch of these aspects. Right? When you find Western intellectuals, writers, poets, painters, composers, going and trying to reclaim the folk culture, part of what they're doing is they're connecting with a culture that is both one, it's more natural. The Brothers Grimm did not want to include any folk tales that they didn't think were at least 1,000 years old. Right? So they expect, when they look at this, they think it's Rousseauian. It is actually, it's maybe untainted by modernity. It's something natural and old, something that goes back to a better, earlier time. This is Undine is actually a novel, but it's written in the late 18th century, but it is in fact based on medieval French legends. Undine is a water nymph who falls in love with the night, but you've got an Irish painter getting a piece of that. So on one level, it's Rousseauian. It goes back to something primitive and simple. And also, it is inevitably wrapped up with nationalism. And this painting, which is a little more recent than a lot of the paintings in here, but the sampo is some sort of mystical device in Finnish mythology that sort of has the power to gird the world together. And it may be a mill that creates gold out of nothing, or the shaft of the world. It's not really clear what it is. I guess it's the greatest MacGuffin ever, right? But here it is, a painting from the late 9th century from Finnish mythology of the device being forged, right? So here we've got this rustic, right? It is heroic, it's deeply emotional, and it's got something very strong to say about national identity, right? So folk culture here combines all those aspects. And last slide, because Laszlo Hundai is a historic figure, 15th century. He's a Hungarian general, fights the Austrians. Right? But here again, you've got a figure, it's a folk hero, but here somebody with a historical truth to him. And it's very inspiring. Right? Brings out, tries to get the connection, I think, between Romanticism and nationalism. Both speak to your heart, speak to an identity, speak to a feeling, maybe a longing. Right? And that's what they both try to cultivate. So hopefully, I hope that maybe shed a little light or try to, my attempt to answer, why do romantics like the rural poor? And the answer is they mean a lot more than just the guys who are herding around their sheep. Thank you very much.
This song is basically about a person's yearning for love and seeking for that and wondering and wishing if they're ever going to find it. And, as a result of that, then the tears start flowing down their cheeks.